Joining us now to discuss Republican presidential candidate and former U.S. Attorney Christie. Governor Christie, thanks for joining us. You said today, earlier, that the Georgia charges against Donald Trump you feel are, quote, unnecessary because you feel as though Jack Smith, the special counsel, has already charged Trump for these exact actions in Georgia. Now, Georgia prosecutors might point out if Trump is elected president, he can just shut down Jack Smith's case or pardon himself, but he wouldn't have the right to do that with a Georgia investigation and or verdict. What's your response to that?
Well, Jake, I don't think that's a prosecutor's job. Prosecutor's job is to look at how you administer justice in this case. And let me say, first off, that I have no argument with the underlying conduct constituting something that should be seriously considered by any grand jury at the state or at the federal level. But what happened here was Jack Smith charged the case. He charged the case weeks ago that consumes this conduct. Now, she could have brought this case without Donald Trump. And because Jack Smith didn't charge anybody else other than Donald Trump in this matter. And so I think the double charging here of Donald Trump is just something that complicates things in a way which makes the administration of justice much more difficult in the near term. And so I didn't think it was a necessary thing to do. Once you saw that Jack Smith was charging him federally for the very same conduct, we would have these kind of discussions amongst federal and state prosecutors when I was U.S. attorney, and we would work it out so that we didn't do these things. And I'm a little bit concerned that this had more to do with ego than anything else, that her office had put a lot of time into an investigation. Jack Smith came in a number of months ago, swooped in, moved quickly, charged the case, and that, at this point, you felt like, I put all this time in. I should charge the president because I put my time in. I don't think that's the way you make these calls. And so I think it was an unnecessary thing to do because she has 18 other defendants who have not been charged anyplace else that she could have charged without Trump and still had a very, very strong case down there.
So beyond that concern, independent of that, when you read this indictment, is this a solid case, do you think?
The conduct is very disturbing, Jake. That's why I said that off the top. When you look at what he's alleged to have done here, along with others on his behalf, the pressure campaign that was put on these folks. Look, Donald Trump got due process in Georgia. There was an original count. There was a machine recount. Then there was a hand recount, all of which came up with essentially the same result. He had access to all the courts in Georgia to contest it in the same way that Al Gore contested these matters in Florida state court back in 2000. The difference being that when Al Gore ultimately lost his case, he conceded and moved on. Donald Trump ratcheted the pressure up even more, ultimately resulting in what we saw on January 6th. And so, yeah, there's a lot of disturbing conduct here, not just by Donald Trump, but by a number of others named in the indictment.
What about the racketeering charges specifically? As a former U.S. attorney, I would think you've probably used RICO statutes statewide and federal, and I'm wondering what you think about Fani Willis's application of them here.
Look, the RICO statute in Georgia is a very broad statute, even broader than the federal statute, Jake. I never used a RICO statute on a state level, but I did use it as U.S. attorney. Look, she's got a number of predicate acts here, which is what required. I think 161 predicate acts she cites. Now, people misunderstand. They think every one of those acts has to be a crime. What she's really establishing is that these were acts in furtherance of the conspiracy to commit that crime. And, the fact here is that the RICO statute being as broad as it is in Georgia gives her the opportunity to do it this way. I don't know if I would have charged it that way, but now we're into the realm of just second guessing. Every prosecutor is going to make their own judgments on these things. But is it permissible for her to have done what she did here at RICO? Given how broad this RICO statute is in Georgia, I think it is.
We had Mark Short, the Vice President Pence's former chief of staff, who's obviously supporting Vice President Pence's presidential race, on yesterday. And I asked him, do you think this fourth indictment is going to have the same effect that the previous three did, which was basically solidifying a lot of support for Donald Trump among Republican voters? He said he didn't know, but that the court case itself, the prosecution, Donald Trump in court, evidence being presented, all of that might change this dynamic that we've seen. What do you think?
Look, I think Mark has that read pretty well. All of this is just theoretical now to the public, right? Most people are not going to read the indictment, Jake. They're just going to read whatever news reports that they read about characterizations of it. It becomes much different when there's a trial going on. And that's why I think Jack Smith charged this case the way he did, with just Donald Trump as a defendant, no one else. He wants to move that case quickly and get this case done. He wants January. That might be a little bit tight, but I could certainly see this happening in February or March of 2024. And so, I do think when evidence starts to be presented, witnesses get on the stand and tell their story. And if the prosecution does an effective job of weaving that story together, and Donald Trump has to be sitting there. Remember, Jake, he has to be there every day. This is not an optional exercise. You are a criminal defendant, and I think that's one of the things folks should keep in mind that are watching. He is now going to be, when he appears next week in Georgia sometime, he's going to be out on bail in 4 different jurisdictions in this country: New York, Miami, Washington, and Atlanta. I think that what Republican voters have to start to ask themselves is 2 things. One, is someone out on bail in 4 jurisdictions really our best chance to beat Joe Biden? And secondly, are we really going to continue to act as if this is normal conduct? It's not. So even if you disagree with some of the criminal charges here, if you think they were an overreach, or as I think on this one, they're unnecessary, it doesn't get rid of the underlying conduct, which is what we should be discussing in the campaign, which is, does this man have the temperament and the character to beat Joe Biden and to be president of the United States again? And I firmly believe the answer to that is no.
Yeah, he'll be under indictment in every single National League East city, with the exception of the great city of Philadelphia.
Governor, what's going on, Jake, with your old city that they're not in?
I just root for the Phillies. I just root for the Phillies. I have nothing to do with prosecutions. But you're a Met fan, I believe. So I thought.
Yes, I am a Mets fan. Suffering, Jake. Suffering.
I thought you
painfully right now.
You appreciate the reference. Republican presidential candidate, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Thanks so much, and best of luck at the debate next week.
Jake, thank you very much, and thanks for having me on.